So good afternoon. Thank you for coming. This is our session. We have a panel of programmers, really. So my name is Declan. I look after ETC's training program, and I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to gather some minds far greater than mine to sit and have a conversation about what it means to be a programmer, how you get to be a programmer, why do you want to be a programmer. So that's kind of really what this is all about. I have some questions prepared just to sort of kick us off with and start a discussion. You are welcome at any point, flag us down if you have questions. You don't have to save them to the end. In fact, I encourage that you don't save them to the end, so feel free to interrupt us at any point. It's really not a problem. We will just jump right in. So, as I said, I'm Declan. I will let the panel introduce themselves. I'll start with Laura, because I know she's looking forward to that.
Hi, I'm Laura Choles. I am currently a lighting programmer at the National Theatre, and I've been there for about 8 years.
My name is Tamykha Patterson. I'm a freelance lighting programmer and also associate lighting designer.
I'm Katie Pitt. Hi, I'm a programmer, lighting programmer. I worked freelance and at the National, a few other places. Also doing a bit of video. And then I had children, and now I mainly teach at various drama schools and do some training for ETC.
Hello, I'm Miles Fisher. I'm a freelance lighting programmer. I also general manage the Charing Cross Theatre in central London and do quite a bit of the EOS training as well.
Good, thank you very much. So I stumbled across this quote, and I think it's kind of, for me, sort of sums up everything that we do in theatre, right? It's not just about being a programmer. The thing is, learn your craft, right? Be good at what you do, and everything else kind of sort of follows on from that. So I just sort of wanted to kick it off with that. Then the next thing I thought I was going to do, I thought I was going to be remarkably clever and have a little interactive moment and do some clever PowerPointy things where we get to have all sorts of little pop-ups. And they worked this morning. And they're not working so much now. So it's going to be less digital interactive and more actual interactive. So I'm just going to kick out a little bit of questions out into the house just so we can see who's here, experience levels, what you do, that sort of thing. So first of all, kind of venues that you work in. So how many of you sort of tend to be sort of large, what I call large-scale venues, a sort of 1,000 plus seats? Yeah? Amazing, lovely, thank you very much. Medium scale, sort of, whatever that is, 500 to 1,000, yeah, amazing, great stuff. Small scale, so 250 to excellent, brilliant. And then studio spaces, anything less, lovely. And what's not on the list, anyone does anything outside of that, so sort of where it's a bit more sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not quite so delineated. So arenas, live events, corporate stuff, where it's a bit of a mixed bag. Anyone's guess? Amazing, good, brilliant. Well, thank you all for coming. We appreciate that. Next little bit of interactiveness. Let's just sort of gauge the room a little bit. So how many people here would consider themselves to be an experienced programmer? Doesn't matter which platform, any platform will do. Yeah, great, lovely stuff. Anyone who's still studying, still a student, getting into things? Amazing, hello students, welcome in the back, there we go. Good. And if you've got sort of some lighting experience, you're not quite sure where you're going yet, what avenue it is, amazing, lovely, thank you. And are you a sort of console operator, someone who sort of goes into a venue and sort of runs shows every night, yeah? Awesome. And then everyone who's just not quite sure what this session was, there we go, thank you very much, Rory. There we are. Amazing, great. So thank you very much for that. So I'll kick it over to the panel, first of all. How did you get into being a programmer? Because when I started lighting, because I'm really old, and when I started lighting, being a programmer wasn't a thing, right? Like, it wasn't an actual role. Someone just happened to do it, right? Like, it just magically happened. It was sometimes the designer, sometimes it was the stage manager, who knows who it was. But over the years, as technology's improved, consoles have got better, et cetera, it's kind of become a role. And I'm quite glad for that, because it takes a whole lot of pressure off me. But how did you get into it? What was your sort of role in?
By accident. I also didn't know it was a role. I was working at a receiving house, and we produced a panto every year, and that was pretty much the only thing we produced in-house. And in the role that I was in, I had to program the panto. So the first year that I was there, I had 4 months to learn how to program a panto with moving lights on a strand, which I didn't know how to do, so I did that, and that was great, and I thought, this is brilliant, I had a lovely time. Then small stitch up, halfway through the following year, when I was preparing to program the strand for the panto, we got rid of the strand and we moved to EOS. So I then had 3 months to learn how to program a panto with moving lights on an EOS. And I just realized that it was something that I really enjoyed doing. I then, in the venue, became like the expert in this new console that we had, which was quite fun. And after a while, I kind of started realizing that this was something I wanted to do more of, and that it turned out that there were people out there that just did that for the majority of their job. So I was just a general technician who programmed a show once or twice a year, to then seeking out more programming opportunities as time went on. And then I ended up moving to London for my first kind of programming job. And then I got a job in a producing house where I was working at the Young Vic and producing work all the time and programming all the time. And that was kind of when it really sort of set in that that was a job that I wanted to do. But probably for the first 4 or 5 years, I was a technician who was programming. And it wasn't until I started working at the English National Opera and then on at the National where really the majority of my job is now programming. So it was quite a long time where I was doing a lot of both, and it's only really once I moved up into a larger scale producing houses that it was what I was spending more of my time doing.
Cool. Tamykha, how about you?
So my path into theatre, I was a technical theatre apprentice at New Wimbledon Theatre, which is a receiving house. And during my apprenticeship, I kind of found lighting. I was like, this is what I want to do. Had no idea what programming was. And then I got a job at the National as a grade 5 lighting technician. And I remember my first show, sitting down and watching a programme, and I was like, I want to do that. And that's basically, it's quite short, but that was, I was like, this is what I want to do. And what excited me about it was I was watching, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how they were doing it, but I was like, I need to learn this skill. It's not something that someone could just walk in and do. And I was like, I need to learn that skill. That is really cool. So that was my kind of way into knowing that programming was a thing, and also realizing that
I wanted to do programming, but taking that step from being in a venue where you're the programmer because you have to be, to a lighting designer saying, I would like you to program my show, that jump is, I think, quite difficult to find. So that's always the question, isn't it? It's like, how do you gain the experience required to let someone, for someone to let you program a show? And the answer is you do that by programming shows. So there's always that sort of dichotomy there. So yeah, I did it by being in a venue where I was programming in the Gerwood Theatre upstairs, made lighting design contacts there, and then when I left there, some of them, I programmed shows for them and kind of just got into it that way. And the same as Laura, went to the ENO for a bit, went to the National for a bit, and sort of learned more there. It was always like learning on the job rather than like formal training and then programming. It was kind of the other way around. It was like, oh, you have to do this show, and now they want you to do this. Right, let's look up how that works, and let's look up how that works. So it was kind of sort of, I knew it was what I wanted to do, but I just kind of had to find the opportunities, I guess, to do it. And then started getting more work and more shows and a bit of video as well. That kind of happened by accident because somebody didn't want to pay a real video programmer. That's always good. You're like, we'll pay you £5 an hour. Yes, please. I will do that. So I will do it badly, and next time I'll do it better. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
It's an interesting question. Somebody asked me this a few times recently, and the general answer is I don't know how I got into this. It kind of dates back to when I was at school, and at that time we were on an ETC Express, and then we had an Ion arrive, and it was very much sit down, work out how it works. No real training on it or anything, just sit, work out how to use it. And then once finishing school, I took a bit of a gap year, just working on projects here and there. And then when I went to university, then it became a bit more, okay, I'm using it every couple of days and so and so. And then from working kind of in venues, just as a venue technician and bits and pieces like that, it became, okay, can you program this for a day? It's a remount of a show, it's easy updates and so and so. So it came from bits and pieces such as that, and then eventually the phone just started ringing with people going, I hear you're a lighting programmer, are you free for this? So it just kind of came out of that, but I don't think there's any day I can turn around and go, okay, this is where the jump happened. This is where it went from not really doing much to suddenly being a lighting programmer. It just kind of develops over time, and then you're just known for it, and people start ringing. So that's how it went for me.
Can I add more to my really short story?
Absolutely.
Sorry. I was never a programmer at the National, I just wanted to clear that up. So I was a lighting technician, and my contract was 22 months, so I'd done my 22 months in Littleton. I left. In that time, I was assistant on my first show, and that's when I was like, oh, this associate thing is cool as well. And then 5 months later, I went back to the National as a technician in the Olivier, and by then I was like, I know what I want to do now. Stayed there for a year. In that time, a lighting designer was like, you're interested in programming? Would you like to do a transfer for me? Which I said yes to. And then immediately after, I was like, what the hell are you doing? It's insane. Haven't really programmed a show before in my life. Idiot. And went quite well. And I left a year later because I know this is what I want to do. So I left the National, having programmed one show, with nothing in the books, being like, I'm going to be a programmer. Like, I was like, I had to take the leap then, because otherwise I was like, I'm going to stay there and get really comfortable. So it was maybe not a great idea.
But can I say, Tamykha when she was at the National, spent all of her free time, like, with a lighting desk.
Yeah.
Practicing, programming, like, learning everything she could. Like.
And I'd bore these two with all the questions. I'd be like, but I don't understand how to do this. I'd be like, okay. And then everyone was so kind all the time. Yeah, and even to this day, if I'm like, I don't know what's going on, I don't know how to do this, can you help me with this? I would pick up the phone and just message these guys and be like, help.
Except that doesn't happen because she knows what she's doing.
Also, you never know everything. Someone's always going to ask you to do something, and you're going to be like, doesn't matter how much experience you have, you're going to have to ask someone else.
Yeah.
100%, yeah.
Very true.
That's how you learn, is you ask the hive mind, because someone out there has done the thing that you don't know how to do. And the support is, brilliant amongst programmers.
Yeah, WhatsApp groups are really helpful.
Yeah.
Sort of putting content in the console.
I think what I would say is that I always think of programming as like, yeah, absolutely, you need to know where the buttons are on the desk. But like we just talked about, if you don't know something, you can find it out. It's not about knowing everything. Actually, one of the key parts of being a programmer is that relationship that you have with the rest of your team, and particularly with your lighting designer. And that is a massive part of it. That's why lighting designers usually have programmers they tend to work with. And we as programmers, we have one or two lighting designers more that we would tend to work with, because that relationship is so important. It's different for every programmer and every lighting designer. So you'd be contributing to a greater or lesser extent to the creativity of the show as well, depending on the relationship between you and your designer, and depending on how they work and how you work. you might have a more of an associate role as well if you don't also have an associate, which most shows don't. But yeah, that relationship is so important because also you're in a very stressful environment. It's very stressful being in a tech. It's very stressful being a programmer in a tech because so often they're the person who's trying to do all the stuff while everyone else is, you know, trying
Lives,
to move
and
on.
everyone can see it. It's
Yeah,
great.
yes, great. So that relationship is so important.
Yeah. I think also being a nice person, like techs are so long, and when you're in a tech, whether it's 2 weeks or it's a couple of months, you're with, they're like
a luxury.
family.
Sorry, I was going to chip in there and go, that's a luxury.
You're with the same people for such, like you share lunches and dinners together, and if you're not a nice person, and I just feel like it just makes such a difference just to, and you all want the same thing, you all have the same goal. So I think that on the back of what Katie says makes a big difference as well.
You also, the reason why programmers and designers will often work together a lot is it's really helpful if you can understand what they're trying to do. And, you know, the more you work with a designer, because you can work together as a team and they feel really supported by you, and you feel great because you can support them really well in what it is that they're trying to create, even when maybe it's not going very well for them. You know, sometimes techs are hard, and whatever their vision for the show was isn't coming out how they think, and that does happen, and it's a nice comforting place to be when they know that you've got their back, I suppose, as well. And it's not just them looking at it creatively. There's someone there who maybe could help if they're in a bit of a tricky situation or whatever. Not that that's necessarily your role, but with the people that you work with a lot, you kind of want to do that for them.
I think it's... Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree with all the points raised so far. It's very much a creative team, and you are very much part of that team. And having a relationship with the lighting designer is probably one of the most important things. Again, yeah, I agree. I only work with a few lighting designers here and there. But it's also learning how they speak. Every lighting designer speaks in a slightly different language, the way they use terminology and so on so. And it's translating how they speak into what you're doing. And so on a few times when I've worked with a new lighting designer, you will spend the first hour and a half trying to work out exactly what they mean. Some people say full as tops, for example. I've only worked with one lighting designer that ever does that, but it's just taking that terminology and working out exactly what they mean and so. And at the same time, the amount of times I've been in tech and you get to 8 p.m. in the evening, it's been a long day of tech, and the director will turn around and say, oh, can we make this a little bit moodier or something? And then you can just see the lighting designer just kind of go, yes, sure, we can totally do that, and then go, and it's being able to chip in at that moment and go, oh, I'll tell you what, have you thought about trying this? And they won't often, they won't always go with your idea, but it might get them to go, oh, hang on a minute, that's a good idea. Why don't we try this? And making that work. So for me, it's about the collaboration and being part of that creative team. And it's not just about pressing buttons. It's that I think is the thing.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. So you touched on it, came up a little bit here, that you can often find yourself in a bit of a sort of associate or assistant kind of role. Because it's not often that shows have budgets for associates and assistants and things, unless you're in the very unionized Broadway, where the assistants have assistants. But how do you sort of manage that? Because in addition to managing all the data and stuff that you're doing, you're now also, keeping track of lighting plan updates and I mean, how do you fit that into your sort of thinking, because in addition to, because you're not just plumbing in the cues and creating stuff, right? You're also making notes of, I need to clean up that focus, we need to go up and fix the edge on those. So you're also making your own set of other notes as well.
Yeah. Well, I've worked on a few shows where I have been credited as the lighting programmer and associate lighting designer, and apart from one, from the get-go, I knew that I was the associate and the lighting programmer. Did I say? Yeah, lighting programmer. So I go in, I start knowing that I am doing both jobs, which is easier because you kind of set yourself up. So I worked on one show where I was the programmer and the associate, and we didn't have an assistant. So I had to do the follow spot cue sheets, keep up with that, drew with the plans, keep up with the plans, obviously be there for fit up to make sure that the bodies are all okay, but then be on the console to then patch and do whatever. And it was a lot of work, but at the end was very rewarding. But when you go in, I guess, knowing that that's what you're doing, it's a lot easier because you've planned to do it. Whereas if I didn't know, and then I'd be like, oh, so photo spots, I haven't done anything for them, so I don't know, just make it up, like whoever's talking, point a light at them. Do you know what I mean? Like, it'll be like a lot harder. But like as it's been mentioned,
is an awful lot of work. It's huge. That is 2 people's worth of work. And so I do think that it is massively advisable that you agree that that's what you're going to do in advance and you go into it eyes open. Otherwise, I actually think if you're partway through a process, it's a lot for one individual to take on. And so I think getting that thrust on you partway through the process is not okay,
to me,
actually.
It wasn't that great because obviously you jump in partway through, so you're like, oh, the plans maybe here, and then some people start talking to you about, oh, have you got this kit? And you're like, I don't know, I never like saw the kit list, I never saw anything, and then you have to start looking at documentation and not just like taking photos of the lights, which you normally do, but doing measurements and photos and all these other bits, these extra bits. And you're like, I've got to find time for that now somehow. And then you've got to, now I've got to be friendly with the other creatives because now I'm part of their team, and it just all kind of goes a bit. Then when you realise you have no time for that.
You got to hope that the people who, like the production manager and the producers, like understand the job that they're telling you to do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I've had, not very often, but like a couple of things where you sort of send the production manager an email saying, I'm coming in tomorrow to take photos, and they're like, oh, we haven't agreed this in the budget. You're like, but that's a standard part of putting on a show.
Like, you need to prep work.
That's another big thing. Because more and more, as shows get more complicated, you need to do more prep on the desk. And it needs to be understood that you don't just turn up on the first day of tech and that's your first day of work. Depending on the scale of the show, you've spent days beforehand.
So touching on, 2 things I want to pick up on there. First I'll pick up on prep, and then in case I forget, the other thing I want to pick up on is archiving, if you can remind me to come back to that. So prep-wise, I mean, I get the sense that producers are starting to consider paying people for prep days. I believe it's getting better. How much prep? Sorry, phrase it differently. Do you have a base show file that you go to, and then you work from there? Do you start from scratch every time? And I know the process is different with somewhere like the National, for instance, so we can touch on that. But like, what's your go-to? Because I know some programmers who have like a monster base show file that they load up that's got all their color palettes and all their everythings, and others just go, we'll just see what happens when we get there. What's your thoughts and feelings?
I start from scratch every time. I don't have a base show file. It's too much stuff. I like to know where I am. I don't think it takes very long to begin a new show file and pop your stuff in. I mean, depending on the size of your rig, but if you know what you're doing and you know what, I might import my empty beam palettes, maybe some empty color palettes, but I'll start from scratch because every show's different. Every show's got different kinds of lights. Every show has different needs. Every show's on a different scale. I used to have color palettes that I took with me, but actually every show uses different color palettes, and different light types. So suddenly I was just carrying around all this color palettes.
I mean, it's also the famous question, well, give me lead 201. Oh, well, that's not lead 201,
exactly.
right? So,
always.
You have that conversation.
Yeah, and lead 201 at 50% on an LED isn't lead 201 at full, and, and it looks different on the set, and it looks different on the costume, and it's always, so I always start from scratch. It's probably a little bit more work, but I'm not sure it is because it means that I don't have all of this extra stuff that I then have to deal with in my show file that I don't need and is there. So
I'm the same. I kind of start from scratch most of the time. I would say I probably merge in macros. Other than that, yeah, you're always dealing with different fixtures. Is it worth having a base show file? Same thing, color palettes are always different, and based on the fixtures, they're going to be slightly different. So I've thought about it many times. The one thing I would like to do that I haven't done yet, but I'm working in the process of doing, is trying to keep a little bit of a base show file with macros and snapshots. Because with the amount of different desks you have, you've got Ion, Geo, Apex 5, 10, etc. I think it might be worth having snapshots. So that's kind of my take on it. So.
Yeah, I'm the same. I start from scratch. The only other thing that I really pull over, if I've worked with a lighting design before and they're like, oh, the same like sort of fixtures and same fixture, and they're like, okay, this is our 201, so I might pull that over and then put it as a point number so that I know it's pulled over. But I've done that recently, and the lighting designer was like, oh yeah, this kind, and I was like, would you like this and this, or this? And they're like, oh, what was that kind? I was like, well, this is the 201 that we use, and that I was showing, I was like, okay. But like Katie was saying, when you've got different set, costumes, skin types, it just all just start again. So yeah, I start from scratch as well.
But then the National's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, we are the absolute opposite. So I work in a team of 4 programmers, and we effectively are a bit like freelancers in the National Theatre. So we're a team of us, and we get deployed to each of the 3 theatres on a show-by-show basis. So the last show I programmed was in the Littleton, the next one's the Dorfman, and the one after that, the Olivier. So that's obviously great. But what it means is we've got a team of programmers who are all using the same show files, and we have 3 venues, all of which have a rig that exists in the venue already, and then the lighting designer adds on top of that on a show-by-show basis. So for us, starting from scratch every time would be a lot of extra work because we're basically starting from something. The other thing is we have a massive advantage that we're using the same equipment every time. So a lot of our fixtures are the same, and we're using the same things over and over again. So that's all a massive advantage. So you can already tell the fact that we're starting from show files, there's so many different things that I'm saying that are the opposite to what these guys are experiencing as freelancers. So what we actually have is we effectively have the 3 venue show files, and then we have like a library show file. And that has fixtures, beam palettes, color palettes. It also has snapshots in ranges for each of the 4 of us. It's got macros that we all want, and it has loads of macros that I don't use because they're not ones for me, they're ones for someone else. So actually our library file is huge and has a lot of stuff because it's 4 programmers worth of tools. So that's kind of interesting. And effectively what we do is we smush the 2 together. So if I'm doing a show in the Littleton, I take the library file and the Littleton basic show file, and I smush the 2 things together. And then I call that the show that I'm doing. And then I patch the show rig on top of that. So actually our show files are quite big and quite cumbersome, which then sometimes means if we're taking a show outside of the National, maybe doing a transfer somewhere, there's a load of stuff that I actually delete, and I just remove all this information that people who are just taking this one show and it's in isolation, they don't need all of that stuff. They don't need to see, snapshots that belong to my colleagues. That's not useful. So yeah, it's basically we're in a bit of a different and a unique situation in that we have all of this stuff that exists as a kind of fixed thing that then we adapt on top. So that's kind of why for us we'd be repeating the same work every single time. So that's why we do it a bit differently.
Cool, thank you.
Before we move on, Declan,
Yes.
Miles, can you elaborate for those who aren't as au fait with EOS what you mean by you store your snapshots?
Yes, just in terms of screen layout. So snapshots on EOS are basically your screen layouts where you put your live channel display, your tombstones, in other words. So it's just how you lay things out. On an Ion, you're very much limited to 2 screens. When you go to something like an Apex 10, you could have up to 5 screens, for example. I find that making these screen layouts takes forever, and you're doing it every single show. I always use the same kind of layout, so I always know, okay, I want this here, that here, depending on what console I go to. But my idea is to basically have these snapshots in a show file, have a range of those snapshots depending on what the desk is. So if you've got, let's say, you're using an Ion, 2 screens, maybe you put them in the 2000s. When you get to something with a 5 screens, you keep them in the 5000s, something like this. And then when you come up to a desk, all you're doing is merging in your snapshots. You can recall them. That's kind of the idea I had. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's the other advantage that I have over you guys, is that I'm always programming on an Apex 10, and so are my colleagues, and we have 3 external monitors. So my layout is the same every time. And that just shows the real big difference between how you guys are working, and that it's really different each time. And actually for us, there's a lot of really common themes. So that's why we have all that set up done already.
Whereas the rest of us who are in the trenches don't quite, sort of get that luxury, right? So another little quick sort of bit of interactivity. Just sort of getting a sense of what kind of sort of stuff you mostly work on. So how many sort of do what I would sort of call theatre, so plays, things like that. Is that, yeah, good. Musicals? Lives in a musical world? Yeah, good. And I'm assuming there's some crossover at some point. Who lives in the world of opera? Yeah, nice. I do love a bit of opera myself, I have to say. Although I find it a very strange medium. Do you know what I mean? I love it. I mean, I think it's fantastic, but it's one of those things. They'll sing on the stage like, there's someone at the door, someone at the door. I'm like, why don't you go answer the door, mate, if you know they're there, right? But anyway, I digress. Who works in dance, whether it's sort of contemporary or classical? Yeah, good. Live music, bands. Yeah, oh, nice, really good. Okay, so I'm guessing sort of a lot of sort of busky kind of stuff. Good. We're going to touch on that in a sec. And then sort of comedy, stand-up, fairly sort of straightforward, sort of regional theatre, kind of every night's a different thing, right? Mary's Dance School, 10 groups of little darlings, and then the next group's a band. Yeah, good. Lovely. So in terms of sort of styles of programming and things, do you find you tend to work in sort of traditional cue lists? Is that sort of start at the top and work your way through? Yeah, nice. Who lives in busking world? Nice, good. And then who's sort of in the world of sort of presets on faders, put a bunch of looks on faders? Yeah, mic them up, good. No harm there. And then I suppose everyone else is a little bit of everything, really? Yeah, there we go, good. So we touched on sort of busking and things, so I'm going to kick that back. I know most people here work in sort of linear sort of...
the thought of busking.
linear sort of cue world. But, well, this is the thing, right? So how... are you at a point where you're going, I know what I do and I'm comfortable in this? If someone says, hey, we're going to do a show, do you want to busk? You're going to go, I'm not your thing, or is it something that you're keen to sort of dabble in? Like, where do you sort of find yourself falling on that sort of scale?
I like knowing what I'm doing. I like knowing what I'm doing really, really well. So I'm terrified of being popped in somewhere where they ask me to do something I don't know. I'm very much theatre-based because that's what I've always done. So that's my comfort zone. I'm not very good at. I also like something to happen the same way every time. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy to make something in a tech when there's time to do it, but the thought of creating something on a time limit during a show, that fills me with horror. I'll panic. I like having the time to sort of make it, yeah.
Miles, you do a fair amount of sort of busking,
yeah,
sort of on-the-fly stuff, don't you?
I was going to say, I do quite a lot of busking, and for me, I've never been too worried about it because I know the desk so well. Once you get to that kind of level, you feel comfortable no matter what you're going to do. So when you go into a scenario and somebody says, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do this show," and the first thing is work out, okay, how am I going to do this? Am I going to busk it quite a bit? Am I going to try and structure it, or so and so? And then you take kind of the scale of the show. How long is it going to be? How big a show is it? And also whether I'm working on top of something else. Very often I'm busking on top of an existing show. So I'm taking their show file or their rig and then adapting that to a busking kind of layout. And so for me, I like to try and keep a base kind of look. So I kind of keep a cue list with a basic and then add all of my effects and so on the top of it. The one thing I would say about this is faders are really helpful. Like, I use tons of faders when I start busking. I'm using them as global effects masters, color content, effects in terms of like movement, everything like that. So having the extra faders at that point is really, really useful. Whereas when I'm doing theatre, I probably use maybe 2 or 3 faders and that's about it. But yeah, once you're comfortable with the desk, you're fine with it. If somebody was to turn around and say, okay, you're going to busk a show, what desk would you have? I'd always go EOS because I know that the best. I know I can make a show work on an EOS. So, yeah.
And do you ask for a fader wing?
Yes, generally I tend to. I kind of have my own desk, so I tend to do that. And then when I come short, I normally ring Declan and go, can I borrow one? So yeah, you kind of need faders. If not, I have done one with not many faders. And at that point, you're using touchscreens, direct selects, magic sheets, everything like that. So it's just, okay, I have this way of working. If you can't do that, you have to find a way to adapt, which is doable, absolutely doable. It's just taking the time to work out how to adapt your normal method.
In the sort of 3.5 minutes they've
Yes.
given you on the half-hour call when they drop that clanger,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, good. So in addition to knowing your console platform and things like that, are there any other software platforms that you find are helpful, things that you think people should know, that it's useful to sort of have up your sleeve? I mean, I'm assuming general sort of Word for Excel spreadsheets and things perhaps maybe is helpful. I don't know. I mean, I'm old enough that all my stuff is still in Excel. I'd never got around to LightWrite or any of that fancy stuff, which I think you guys probably do. But anything else that's useful, that's worth knowing?
I guess MLA is really good. Moving Light Assistant. We used to document the shows, so the different presets for moving lights and also generic focuses. So if there's a future life, but also if the show's running and you hand it over to an in-house team, that if they have to swap out a fixture, they can look and see that it's doing what it's supposed to do. I guess as well, some nowadays, some sort of like recording, like to record shows becoming quite popular, and to track the cue list as well along with that.
There are a couple of versions. I mean, I know one called Stamp, and I know there are other ones out there if anyone's come across that. But I think it's Mac only still. I don't believe it's found its way across to Windows yet. But it basically connects to your console, and every time it records a video of the show, and every time you hit a go, it stamps that video. So you've now got a record of exactly where your cues
points is really good as well,
So you touched on MLA, which brings me back to the archiving question. Whose job is it to archive this show?
I'll start because it's easy for me. The National, it's the programmer's job. The way that Moving Light Assistant MLA works is you do an export from the console, you import that into MLA, and then you can basically choose what information you want to take photographs of. So you can have the cue list and you can take pictures of each cue. You can have presets, so you can see which moving lights are in which presets, and you can take pictures of the preset as a whole and then the moving lights individually, and then you can import groups of your generics and you can take pictures of each of those, and the channels are kind of attached to it. It's done in a nice format as well, so you can kind of search by channel. So as you say, if you're swapping out channel 1, which is a moving light, you can then select channel 1, it will show you all the presets, and then you can easily hop down and look through all the pictures. So if you swapped a light out, you can look at everything that light's supposed to be doing and compare it to what the new one looks like. So for us, it's the programmer's job to do that. The in-house, the venue teams that are working in each of the theatres, they will we generate focus plots from Lightright, and all of the generics, they will focus plot them themselves. So for example, they'll take a picture from, as if you were focusing the light, so from behind it, and then they write down notes about where the different shutter cuts are, and make sure that things like the frost and colour information is correct. So that's sort of their job, and then I take pictures from front of house of all of the moving lights and all the generics and the
a show where the set moves around and you need a whole bunch of different things, then it takes like a massive coordination of people to archive your show. And so you need someone who is doing that coordination, and there is not always that thought in people's minds of like, it's 3 days till press night. We need to, there's often that little bit of a fight between like, we need to do more rehearsals, or we've done a technical lockdown, we don't want to pay anyone anymore to come in, and there's
understudy rehearsals.
Understudy rehearsals,
Always
understudy rehearsals. So it can be quite hard work to get that time.
Yeah, especially if you're by yourself as well. If you're a programmer by yourself, and the set's doing multiple things, and you're behind a console with a laptop to try and get that moving on stage. It's a lot easier when you have an associate or assistant to kind of run what's going on stage. But when you're by yourself as a programmer, it's a lot harder to kind of do what you're doing, but then get them ready to set up for the next bit. And and then sometimes they're like, why do we have to come in to do that?
Where do you want the set? I don't know what the you have to write down all the automation numbers because no one else knows.
And I feel that other departments kind of see it as a lighting thing, but then also I've been in situations where they're like, we need a recording of the show, lighting, can we have it, or we need to figure this out, have you got this? And it's like, why are we the only ones? Why is everyone relying on us to have documentation of the show? I've had it recently, and then someone's like, we don't have anything for video, and I was like, I don't do video. I want to know angles of the video, and I was like, I can't give you that. My documentation is for lighting. That is it. So
it's slightly lost.
Any questions from anyone in the house? Yes, sir.
Can I ask the ladies who work at the National, do you use prevising prior to working on a show? And would you be receptive to a lighting designer presenting you with a show file that they had prevised in advance?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the question for anyone in the room who didn't hear that is, working at the National, do you work in previs? Part A, Part B is, are you receptive to a designer who has previs stuff and brings you a show file?
So we're really fortunate, and we have something that's called the Viz Suite, and we have a capture license, and it is something that we are actively looking at how we can integrate previs to help us. Shows are getting more and more complex, and it's not just prevising for lighting, but prevising for video, for automation. And so as part of this process, we're kind of looking at how we implement previs to help us, because ultimately, if a show is really complicated, what you actually need is more tech time, which is not as many shows on sale, and more time when the theatre doesn't have people buying tickets. So do you then say, well, the shows are going to scale back and we're going to stick to the tech time that we have, or are we going to continue to be ambitious? So ultimately, at the moment, we are not prevising as standard, but it is something we're actively looking at and seeing how to integrate it. The difficulty for us is that prevising actually requires a lot of buy-in from all sorts of other people. So, for example, a set designer needs to have decided exactly where all of the set is going to go, and all of the, if there's a lot of automation, for example, how that all interacts and which parts are where in each scene. That stuff kind of needs to be decided really early. The lighting designer needs to decide on their lighting rig really early, because we have to prep for previs. We're not prepping for tech, we're prepping for previs, which is in advance of that. So all the dates of everything needs to move earlier. And that's something that at the moment we haven't worked that out. What are we going to do with that? How are we going to set those things in? So at the moment we're in a really it's an interesting question, because we're actually in a trial process at the moment. So I did previs for the show that I just did in the Littleton, and Automation did previs for a show that they're doing in the Olivier. The lighting designer wasn't in a position to be ready to previs at the time when Automation were. So rather than that being two departments working, video were also the same, not ready. So it was just Automation who were ready to do previs. It's interesting, because it's definitely not something that's in a lot of people's workflow, I don't think. And certainly, I think one of the luxuries at the National is that people can often make decisions much later in the day than you could if you're in the West End or elsewhere. And so at the moment, we need to figure out how that works within, the luxury of last-minute decisions, but something that ultimately needs to be decided 3 weeks earlier. And as far as the second part with someone coming in, I don't think that's ever happened. And I guess the answer probably would be, well, we have this all here, and we've got your programmer who's going to be working with you, and we've got capture. So I guess the answer possibly would be, well, we'd prefer to do it in-house, rather than somebody coming with something and kind of saying, here, I've made this is what I'd like to use. But who knows?
But if the lighting designers work with the director separately in advance to say this is how the scenes are going to look, and then presents you that with the capture file, would that be useful to you, or would it push you back a bit going, hang on, you're doing my work?
I don't know. We haven't figured that bit out yet. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. That's not happened before. But maybe as we get further into this that could be something I would imagine would come up as a question in the future. But yeah, for the moment, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
Cool, no problems. Sorry, one more question down. Were you giving us was that a 5 minutes? No. Or was that we're done? Sorry.
Just a quick. Sorry, have you done?
No, go for it. Being cheeky and doing questions.
Just a quick question on a more personal basis, if you like. Two answers from each of you. Firstly, if you have one, which is your favourite desk? And secondly, as a punter, which is your favourite lit performance?
And just so you know, this is being recorded.
Oh.
Tricky. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Well, I can answer that. My favourite desk would be EOS Apex 10, I'd say. Yeah, you can't really beat it at the moment. And favourite lit show, okay, I had nothing to do with it, but Back to the Future on the West End is fantastic. If anyone hasn't seen it, I would highly recommend seeing it. It is amazing, especially with their special effects. So I think the lighting for that is stunning.
My favorite. That's really difficult. I think my favourite desk is probably the App 5, because it's really versatile and you can carry it. It makes so much difference. It's got a nice big screen. My favourite lit show. So I grew up working in like proper old school theatre, and it was a show that I did in the Gerwood Theatre upstairs. We did a Jez Butterworth, The River, with Charlie Balfour, and he lit it with like 30 of those tiny little Source 4 things that were in the set. Oh my gosh, it was beautiful. That's my jam.
Oh, I don't know. I'd probably say TI. Am I allowed to say that? Favorite lit show? I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
It's like picking children. It's impossible.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I couldn't pick a favourite lit show. That's for sure.
Yeah, I could, yeah.
Favourite console, very hard. Well,
Yes,
I'm using an
depends.
Apex 10 at the moment all the time. That's what we're programming on. So I guess I have to say that, right? Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Yes, I have to say that.
Yeah.
Declan says.
Good. So I know we're out of time, so thank you very much for joining us. Just a quick shameless plug of our training. Do sign up if you're interested. We are revamping our training offerings at the moment. And we're developing some courses specifically to help people be better programmers. So it's not just which buttons to press, but why you should press them and ways to prep your shows and some cool macros that you can learn to help sort of speed processes up and things like that. So we're really excited to get those all going. But thank you very much for coming. We are around if anybody wants to come and have a look at any of the stuff or talk to us again. Myself and Laura, you're done today, aren't you? Today's your last day, you won't be on the stand tomorrow. So I'll be on the stand tomorrow if anybody wants to ask anything. And everyone else is, I'm sure, is around and floating, absolutely. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you being here. And enjoy the rest of the show.